Hello and welcome back to Reddit Replies. The question today is, gentlemen, what is the biggest red flag a woman can show on a first date? A study shows that there are women who accept dates just for free meals. In a survey of 820 women, it was found that 33% of them just want to enjoy a good gastronomic meal. In my case, I had a blind date with a girl from Tinder. I only saw those eyes for about 3 minutes before she got hooked on her Instagram and Snapchat. She only responded to her followers. I tried to have a decent conversation, but she would only say, "Oh, cool, here comes the waitress." She didn't even bother to look at the menu and said, "A steak, fries, and a glass of champagne." And on top of that, she suddenly blurts out, "By the way, how much do you earn?" I got up and told her the date was over and left her stranded at the restaurant. Afterwards, she bombarded my phone furiously, claiming that I was supposed to pay for her dinner and exclaimed that she had no money or transportation to go back to her caring boyfriend's place. So yes, she was just fishing for free food and drinks. Story 2, a long time ago, when I was around 19 years old, now I'm 44, I met a girl who worked at a store where I had been sent for a week to help them out from another city, as I worked for the same store. We got along well while working. That night, long story short, we went out after work to a restaurant called Coco's. While we were eating, a guy approached our table and asked her why she hadn't picked up their son, as it was her turn to take care of him. And they started yelling at each other right there in the restaurant. I was polite, finished my food, and then told her I had to go home. It was quite awkward. The next day, I had to go to work at that same store, but she wasn't there that day, so I didn't see her. I worked one more day after that, and she still wasn't there. So I went back to my store and never saw her again. A week passed, and she called me at work, as mobile phones didn't exist back then, and she asked me to have breakfast with her to explain things. I don't know why, but I ended up saying yes and met her the following Saturday in her city at a breakfast place. I arrived at the restaurant, and she was sitting with her mother and grandmother. The girl started apologizing for what happened, crying and begging me for a second chance. At the same time, her mother and grandmother pleaded with me to give her a second chance. Mind you, I had never met them before. Jack, I had just met her. I don't remember the exact details of what happened at the end of that breakfast, but I never saw her again. I still wonder to this day how that guy knew we were at the restaurant, as nobody had mobile phones back then. That's the story. If she starts spending a lot of time on her phone, it means she's only there for you to treat her to a meal. That's it. She's either dating someone else, not interested in you, or all of the above. Story 4, I went out with a girl, and at first, everything was going well, but suddenly, she became cold and started treating me poorly. I wasn't having a good time, so I told her I had to do some things and left. A few hours later, she messaged me saying I had disappointed her, that I gave up so easily, and that she was just testing how much I liked her. Needless to say, I didn't ask her for a second date. I prefer being single. A relationship or sex with the whole cast of bad girls rolled into one person with the mental maturity of a middle schooler. That's the story. Turns out she was married and had a few drinks before confessing it during dinner. On top of that, she had the audacity to ask for another entree to go. I made it clear that the bill was on her. That's story 6. My first date was a disaster. We went to a bar with live music, and she went to get some drinks. When she came back, she was accompanied by a guy with a suitcase. It turned out to be her boyfriend who had just returned from a trip and ran into her by chance. The worst part is that the guy was really nice, and we even became friends. Some time later, when they were no longer together, I confessed to him what had happened that day. Story 7, I politely walked her to the restaurant's door, but she snapped at me, "I don't need any damn man opening the door for me." I followed her to the table, left her $20 so she could take a taxi home, and left. But story 8, I want a man who treats me like a queen. It's usually a way of saying, I want someone who lives and dies for my happiness so that I can be selfish forever. No, thanks. That's story 9. A long time ago, when I was around 19 years old, now I'm 44, I met a girl who worked at a store where I had been sent for a week to help them out from another city, as I worked for the same store. We got along well while working. That night, long story short, we went out after work to a restaurant called Coco's. While we were eating, a guy approached our table and asked her why she hadn't picked up their son, as it was her turn to take care of him. And they started yelling at each other right there in the restaurant. I was polite, finished my food, and then told her I had to go home. It was quite awkward. The next day, I had to go to work at that same store, but she wasn't there that day, so I didn't see her. I worked one more day after that, and she still wasn't there. So I went back to my store, and I never saw her again. A week passed, and she called me at work, as mobile phones didn't exist back then, and she asked me to have breakfast with her to explain things. I don't know why, but I ended up saying yes and met her the following Saturday in her city at a breakfast place. I arrived at the restaurant, and she was sitting with her mother and grandmother. The girl started apologizing for what happened, crying and begging me for a second chance. At the same time, her mother and grandmother pleaded with me to give her a second chance. Mind you, I had just met her. I don't remember the exact details of what happened at the end of that breakfast, but I never saw her again. I still wonder to this day how that guy knew we were at the restaurant, as nobody had mobile phones back then. That's the story. Jeff, if she starts spending a lot of time on her phone, it means she's only there for you to treat her to a meal. That's it. She's either dating someone else, not interested in you, or all of the above. Story 11, a coworker, here's the translation of the remaining part of the video transcript. Kind 1, set me up on a blind date with her friend. I agreed to meet her at the bar, but the girl asked me to pick her up since she didn't have a car. I arrived at her supposed apartment and saw her arguing with a man at the entrance. He gave her the finger and spat on her face before getting into his car. It was at that moment I realized she had a suitcase with her, probably filled with clothes. After finishing the drink I ordered with the menu, she was on her fifth beer, part of the menu she ordered, which wasn't cheap. During the date, I couldn't talk much, she only shared anecdotes about the abuses she suffered in her childhood and how all men had been jerks to her. When the bill arrived, she passed it to me and said she had no money, wallet, or purse. Literally, on the way to the car, she told me she wanted to have unprotected sex, but not to worry because she claimed she couldn't get pregnant since she was already expecting another man's child, as she was apparently over a month pregnant. While I was driving her home, she started making gestures with her suitcase and asked me to let her live with me for a few weeks. She was broke and desperate, and she was starting her new job as a stripper on Monday. It turned out the guy she was arguing with let her stay with him until she saved enough money to rent a place. Unfortunately, that guy kicked her out because she brought other men to his apartment for some fun. I firmly told her I wasn't interested, so I dropped her off at the apartment where I picked her up. When I return to work, I will have a serious talk with the girl who set up the date. In short, the girl got pregnant by one man, moved in with another man, and was already ready to move in with a third man. Amazing. Well, let's move on. This is story 12, have you ever dated someone who was obsessed with birds? I have. It was an unforgettable experience. Her name was Rebecca. I met her at a New Year's Eve party. She was tall and artistic, and she wore feather accessories in her hair that caught my attention. I approached her and told her I liked her feathers. She smiled and said she loved birds and always had a feather somewhere. I thought it was a curious detail but didn't give it much thought. We danced all night. When midnight struck, she kissed me on the cheek and said she wanted to hook up with me. I picked her up for our first date a few days later, and I was surprised to see that she had the same hairstyle with the same feathers. I thought maybe it was her personal style or something. We went to a lovely Italian restaurant near DC, and she told me she had just graduated from college and was tired of dating only boys. I was only a few years older than her, and she said she really liked the idea of dating an adult. Well, I felt flattered and thought the night was going well until dessert arrived. Somehow, the whipped cream on my pie reminded her of her ex-boyfriend, and she started telling me how she had stalked him after he broke up with her. She said she hid in the bushes near his house to spy on him, slashed his car's tires, and covered his entire car in whipped cream and eggs. And the worst part was she was laughing while telling me all this, as if it was the funniest thing in the world. I didn't know what to say, I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. And this is story 13, imagine you've been dating a girl for a few months who eats very little, but over time, you notice her belly getting bigger and bigger. One day, you make a joke that she looks pregnant, and she starts crying, telling you she was abused. That she loves you and needs you. Being a good and understanding person, you decide to stay with her because you believe you can raise a child and are willing to do whatever it takes. Until you tell a mutual friend about it, and he avoids looking at you. You insist on knowing what's going on, and eventually, he drops the bomb that she lied to you at the beginning of the relationship because she thought it wouldn't last long and she plans to use the baby to tie you down and take advantage of you for life. So you go to her house, tell her everything you know, and all she asks is who told you. In the end, you leave her. All her friends are left astonished. Story 14, on our second date, she asked me to take her shopping. Since I didn't have a driver's license, being only 15 years old, I asked my dad to drive us to the mall. And then she took us to Victoria's Secret to buy clothes and other things. After an hour and a half, she thought she had enough and asked me to help her carry her items to the checkout. So I grabbed the rest of her things and took them to the counter. Then she stood still and acted as if I were going to pay. And I said something like, "This is going to be quite expensive, where do you work?" And she said something like, "What do you mean? I thought you were going to help me with this." I asked if she was joking, and she repeatedly said no. First of all, we had only been on one movie date, so we weren't even in a relationship. Second, I was around 15 years old, and I didn't have $350 to spend on clothes for someone I had only spent about 6 hours of my life with. She kept refusing to let me pay, saying mostly that she didn't have the money to pay in the first place, even if she wanted to. She called her father, asked him to pick her up instead of waiting for mine. Return to get me next weekend. Don't go out like that. And this is story 15, I went on a date with a girl I met on Tinder. I picked her up because she didn't have a car. It took her about 40 minutes to get to her house. She didn't look anything like her pictures. She wasn't my type, but I thought, you know what, I'll give her a chance, who knows. She suggested we go to Denny's because they had the best breakfast in town, according to her. Spoiler, they didn't. We sat down and tried to have a conversation, but all she kept saying was, "Wow, the waitress is so hot. I love Colombian girls." She said this twice. I went out with a submissive guy before you, and he was really cute, but he was too in love, and I didn't feel the same, you know. It's not rare, how many black people are here? Then the bill came, and she asked how much it was. She started searching for money in her bag, and then I said something like, "I should be the one paying. I invited you out. Don't worry about the money. If you want to pay your part, I respect that, but I'd love to treat you." There was no way to convince her not to pay, although I wasn't going to beg on my knees either. After eating at Denny's, I asked if everything was okay. She had a sour expression on her face. And she said, "Yeah, it's just that I don't like the rain." It wasn't even raining. She continued to look bored and said, "Well, I just want to go home." I wanted to spend more time with her, to see if I could call her. So I suggested going to the mall, to the movies, or bowling. But she said no to everything, she just wanted to go home. And here comes the most incredible part, while I was silently driving her home, she blurted out, "Well, I'll be honest with you. The reason I'm upset is that you made me pay." I explained that it had been too much for me to pay, and I simply respected her decision to pay for her part. Then she started complaining about how badly men treated her. To which I remained silent. We arrived at her house, and you won't believe it, she looked at me and said, "Do you want to come in for a while? There's no one home." I stared at her and said, "I'm sorry, but I have things to do." So I went home and blocked her. Well, folks, that's the last story for today. As always, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel to not miss any more videos. So for now, see you in the next video.